Hello my viewers and welcome back to my channel. Now in today's video, we are taking a look into a crucial conversation about Palala culture and identity. For too long, Palala people have been seen as the default, the neutral, the standard. But what does that really mean? Is it a culture or is it a power structure? Now we'll be exploring the complexities of Palala identity and how it's often tied to a sense of belonging and supremacy. We'll hear from Palala people themselves who are grappling with their own sense of identity and culture. From the idea that Palala culture is a myth to the ways in which Palala people have given up their ancestry and traditions to become Palala Americans, we will be examining the ways in which Palala identity is formed and performed. Now we'll also be looking at the problematic ways in which Palala people form groups and create a sense of belonging, often at the expense of others. From incel culture to Palala supremacy, we will be shining a light on the darker side of Palala identity and the harm it can cause. So with that said, check out these interesting videos. I will be right back.
We need to stop saying that white people don't have culture because it actually helps white supremacy, and I'm going to explain. I literally got my anthropology notes out like from 2 years ago to specifically make this video, so stick with me. I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible, so I'm going to be moving fast. I'm sorry if I'm going too fast for some of you guys. But in anthropology, there are 4 subsections. Those 4 subsections include archaeology, bioanthropology, linguistic anthropology, and social cultural anthropology. Now, the one that we're worried about specifically with who's deciding what is considered culture is going to be that social cultural anthropology, although archaeology has something to do with it given the fact that they're the ones digging things up. And obviously they're all interconnected, but that's not the point today. And I know that I get in some of my mentions people being like, well, you're just a woke liberal because you got educated. And like, yes, anthropology did drag me very, very far left, very, very fast. However, anthropology as a subject was not always like that. I promise you, it actually has its history in colonialism, and that's very important for what I'm about to explain. Anthropology used to just be the British send an old white dude and be like, hey, teach us about this culture so we can use it against them so we can colonize them faster. Also, we've got the Indiana Jones types of archaeology where they just go to places and then they steal shit. The way that cultural anthropologists do this is specifically called an ethnography. So what that means is that they go to said culture, they sit down and they write. What that used to be is that they sit down and they would write objective facts. But eventually anthropology was like, maybe that's not exactly the best idea. Maybe we should actually explain with our writings our own reflections as we go and include our subjective biases within. You observing someone's culture, you're coming from your own culture, so therefore no one is truly objective. But why? Why would it help white people, and specifically white colonizers, to say that they have no culture? That's because they're trying to pretend to be objective. With objectivity comes authority. So this quote is from Herskovits at the Heart of Blackness. It's a documentary about this guy called Herskovits who helped create African studies in the United States. I think that it really summarizes it very well. Authority didn't have an identity. Authority spoke with the voice of the universe, yet white voices are seen as neutral, as though they have no real identity, making whiteness the center of our universe. This concept was further developed later on when they said, if you're black, you have a stake in racism, in talking about racism, but if you're white, then you can talk about it objectively. That's why we've got to stop saying that white people don't have culture. So 1, the idea of white versus black is obviously very useful for racism and white supremacy. But 2, it conveniently erases all of the culture of colonialism and just makes it seem more objective.
Something I've been thinking a lot about recently is how we as white people in America generally lack a sense of belonging towards a specific identity or culture. Meaning, because we essentially gave up our ancestry, gave up traditions and cultural things in Europe to be white Americans, we don't have a sense of identity, so we can tend to form groups that can sometimes be problematic because we want to feel a sense of belonging. And I'll kind of explain with examples what I mean. So if you think about like incels, for example, a lot of incels are like young white males or older, and I feel like generally they feel a sense of belonging and fitting in with other men that hate women. So it's like forming a sense of group identity, but around the hatred of another group. And I feel like this just like happens a lot with white supremacists too. Another example would be like a lot of white people find their identity through associating with a particular football team. Especially I like see this in the Midwest. It's like just a lot of people that are like very like, oh, I'm like a Packers fan, like I'm a Vikings fan, and you just like have this like undying like commitment to like a sports team, which I like truly don't understand, because like the sports team aren't even like from like the same state as like the state that they represent usually, but that's besides the point. The problem is with that is like, if your whole identity is based around like football, and like your whole like social identity is interacting with other people around football, I mean, there's just like a lot that can negatively come from that. Namely, there's a lot of like, drinking associated with, gambling associated with, and I'm not trying to necessarily say it's bad or shame anyone. It's fine to like football, but what I'm trying to say is like, a lot of times that these group identities that we form are just much different than having a group identity, say if you were connected well to your like Norwegian roots or Swedish roots. Like that to me is like what I've been like trying to get back into, because like I do like feel like a greater sense of purpose, like understanding my like cultural ancestral identity.
So white culture exists, but it is not a culture as such. It's a power structure, an ideology. It's white supremacy, the will to power, the desire to be the universal subject, to be default, neutral, to be considered merely human without having to hyphenate or qualify. Now, the problem is, occupying that neutral default position doesn't really lend itself to the sorts of idiosyncrasies and particularities that we associate with culture. Not only that, it leads you to the denial of that sort of specificity. Think of the way that transphobes like to claim that they don't have pronouns. Now, of course, white people have cultures. They have regional, national, linguistic communities that they belong to. But that is very different from saying that they have a white culture. And in fact, those individual cultures do a lot of work to undermine the idea of white culture and white supremacy. Because if you call yourself, for instance, an Irish American, you're weakening your claim to being only American. You've now joined the long list of people with hyphenated identities. And I would add one last point, something else that is missing from that general category of white culture, which is a claim to injury. So the sociologist Wendy Brown, in her book States of Injury, describes how identity categories tend to be formed in response to some sort of harm. A group of people is oppressed, they form a community in response, and then name themselves. And that series of acts, is the formation of a culture. But white culture has never had that experience. We share no common experience of oppression or victimization because of our race, which goes a long way to explaining why it is that we say something provocative like white culture doesn't exist, because it is a very different animal.
So to me, white culture is industrialism, cultivation, intelligence, cleanliness, order, generosity, and so much more.
Hello, my friend. I completely disagree with this notion that there is a white culture. The idea that there is a set culture that all people of a specific skin tone or racial categorization adhere to. Now, people that we consider white, people of Europe and much of the Western world, do have their own cultures, but to say all of those cultures are the same just doesn't make much sense to me. Before I continue, I wanted to get to another part of this video.
And I think the same can be said of other ethnicities, because with brown culture, red culture, yellow culture, black culture, as well as white culture, we need a foundation that builds into all.
As a South Asian, I also don't agree with the notion that there is a brown culture. There are various cultures within South Asia that are quite distinct and often quite different to each other. I also don't understand the idea that there is a yellow culture. That itself sounds like a problematic term. For example, a person from Mongolia likely has more cultural similarities to someone in Kazakhstan than they do to someone who lives in Indonesia or Southeast Asia. The idea that all these groups are a single culture because they look the same makes no sense. I think where this argument stems from is the existence of black culture. The concept of a black culture doesn't imply that all people that share an African phenotype share a single culture. It more so represents the black identity which exists in America. The black identity in America isn't just a racial idea, it now represents an ethnic group, right? And that ethnicity, like other ethnicities, has its own culture which is distinct from other people that exist in Africa or other parts of the world that we may consider black. Now, if you're a white person in America, you definitely still have a culture. It's just that that culture is not exclusive to you based on your appearance. Unless perhaps you identify with a diasporic community. What confuses me the most is that the European world is so culturally diverse. Why would you want to paint over that with a single brush? Also, before I end this, the things you attributed to your idea of a white culture are in no way exclusive to the communities that identify with that racial identity.
Now, the concept of Palm culture and identity is a complex and multifaceted issue. On one hand, some argue that Palm culture is a myth, a power structure designed to maintain supremacy and privilege. Others claim that Palm people have a distinct culture, shaped by their history, traditions, and experiences. However, as the Palm man in the video astutely observes, the problem with occupying the neutral or default position is that it denies the specificities and idiosyncrasies that are essential to any culture. Palm culture in this sense becomes a sort of anti-culture defined by its lack of cultural markers and its reliance on power and privilege. Now, the Palm lady's commentary also highlights the ways in which Palm people often form groups and create a sense of belonging, frequently at the expense of others. This can manifest in harmful ways such as incel culture or Palm supremacy. Now, Palm dominant culture describes how Palm people and their practices, beliefs, and culture have been normalized over time and now considered standard in the United States. As a result, all Americans have all adopted various aspects of Palm culture. Palm supremacy is an ideology where Palm people are believed to be superior to non-Palm people. Now, this fallacy is rooted in the same scientific articism and pseudoscience used to justify slavery, imperialism, colonialism, and genocide at various times and throughout history. Palm supremacist ideologies and their followers continue to perpetuate the myth of Palm racial superiority. Now, the belief of Palm superiority has been part of the United States since its inception. The Palm European imperialists who settled here believed they were inherently superior to non-Palm groups. Now, these beliefs justified atrocities like the genocide of Native Americans and nearly 250 years of African slavery. After slavery, Palm supremacist ideologies manifested into a series of laws that would limit the freedom of Black Americans, known as Black Codes and Jim Crow. Palm supremacy and its legacy can still be found in our legal system and other institutions through coded language and targeted practices. Now, direct and violent forms of articism that promote Palm supremacy have been on the rise in recent years. These acts are more directly linked to Palm nationalism. Palm nationalism is a concept born out of Palm supremacy. A key difference is a focus on nationhood. Palm nationalists in the United States advocate for a country that is only for the Palm race due to the feelings of entitlement and racial superiority. Now, they also believe that the diversity of people in the United States will lead to the destruction of Palm coloredness and Palm culture, hence the coloration to Palm supremacist ideology. Now, when it comes to topics about Palm culture, I always ask this question: what is Palm culture? Does Palm culture even exist? Every race or ethnic group that is non-Palm has its own distinct and unique culture and cultural values. However, Palm culture itself is not clearly defined, nor is the cultural values. Now, much of Palm culture is comprised of various customs and traditions of other races, primarily through the narrative of America and Palm supremacy. To expound on this idea to a general understanding, Palm people have always dominated society, especially society in America, with Palm people having the lion's share of American through manipulation and exploitation of other races through slavery, laws, politics, history, and religion. Either physical exploitation or stolen intellectual or historical material taken and branded as a Palm creation. Now that the basis of Palm culture could be understood, it also should be noted that Palm culture or narratives of Palm America are obtruded on all races across the nation. Now, Palm culture, if we can call it that, is a term that's often used to describe the dominant cultural norms and values that perpetuate Palm coloredness as the standard. But let's be clear, this so-called culture is built on on a foundation of oppression, privilege, and erasure. At its core, Palala culture is defined by its reliance on power and supremacy, often at the expense of marginalized communities. It is the assumption that Palala people are the default, the norm, and that everyone else is other. It's the erasure of Black, Indigenous, and people of color's histories, cultures, and experiences. It's the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes, microaggressions, and systemic racism. The harm that Palala culture causes to marginalized communities cannot be overstated. It's the denial of opportunities, resources, and justice. It's the perpetuation of violence, discrimination, and trauma. Now, it's the constant reminder that Black people and people of color's lives are not valued. They are not seen and they are not heard. We need to acknowledge the harm that Palala culture causes and work towards dismantling it. Palala people need to listen to and center the voices of marginalized communities. They need to educate themselves about the history and ongoing impacts of colonization, slavery, and systemic racism. They need to take action to create a more just and equitable society where all cultures and identities are valued and respected. We have finally come to the end of the video, but what do my viewers have to say? Share your thoughts as well on what you think about these videos and what was being talked about. Thank you for always watching, and see you in my next video as I bring you another interesting video.